Joining me now is Eileen O'Connor, Senior Vice President for Communications Policy and Advocacy at the Rockefeller Foundation, and Ambassador Mike McFaul, former U.S. Ambassador to Russia. Thanks. Very good to see you. Eileen, it's great to see you again. I think the last time I saw you may have been in Kabul when you were
at the State
Department. Indeed. And your organization has been closely involved, of course, with rescue efforts by private charters, getting people at risk out. So what options does Rockefeller now have with the U.S. military withdrawn?
Well, the Rockefeller Foundation has supported some of contractors and NGOs in their efforts. We've given financial support to getting people out, and that was airlifts in the beginning, as well as to other third countries, to help them get to those third countries where they can be processed for visas to the United States or as refugees to other countries. So now what's needed really, Andrea, is that we really need the United States diplomatically to work towards establishing some humanitarian corridors, perhaps to Central Asia, which I'm sure Ambassador McFaul could speak to, or also to Pakistan, where they then could either remain or be processed perhaps to another country, to the United States, as they qualify under the special immigrant visa, as well as the P2, where they worked for a U.S. government-funded organization. But I would also say, Andrea, that I really would commend all of the Americans that came together in this rescue operation. It was journalists, former veterans, there were State Department officials, currently Foreign Service officers who worked with me in Afghanistan from all over the world, were volunteering to be on a task force, as well as the military, both in CENTCOM and on the ground, the embassy on the ground, both in Kabul and in these receiving countries. Literally, we're working around the clock, talking to people at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. And I think that just shows how really committed people were to our Afghan allies. And regrettably, we had this severe loss of life of our military members, and my heart does go out to their families as well.
Well, I just want to say, from personal experience, part of the International Women's Media Foundation, I know you're familiar with their efforts. We're working nonstop. The staff was incredibly active on this. And we, board members were all working on this. And there were complaints from some groups, for instance, that Voice of America, people were left behind, and that Afghan at-risk journalists were left behind because they didn't qualify for the so-called P2 or P1, certainly not SIV categories. They're not military. They didn't work for American companies, but they were part of the Afghan journalists, more than 100, at least 100 left behind. We told them to get trained.
I would
the State Department helped them with grants, and they didn't qualify for anything. And then time ran out after that suicide bombing because they closed the gates to Afghans.
Well, and that's why we have to advocate for this humanitarian corridor to other countries. They can be then qualified as refugees under UNHCR. And so that would be at least enable them to avoid any kind of retribution from the Taliban. But it's also the job of the United States and the international community to withhold the aid and assistance and the money that is currently embargoed from the Taliban until they do live up to their promises for supporting, that they would support and uphold the rights of women and minorities, that there would be no retribution. And that's really important right now. And we really do have to hold their feet to the fire, as well as some of their allies in Pakistan and other places, to try to influence them to make sure that they do not have any retribution against these people. And I know how involved you were and how many people were. And I think it just shows how people can join together across the political spectrum when it's something like this and lives are at stake.
And I just want to give a shout out to you, to Milan Verveer, to Vital Voices, all these organizations. Ambassador McCall, one of the big problems is Russia. You know Russia so well, but we've had a lot of trouble with Russia telling the U.S. You can't have basing rights in the stands. And I don't know whether we can get any kind of help on refugee relief from those overland routes.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. First of all, I also know many American-funded NGOs in Afghanistan, and many hundreds, probably thousands of people are still there. And I applaud the work that Rockefeller and others have done. It's been fantastic. But I want to remind everybody, the mission is not over. As Eileen said, those people are still there. We have to find new modalities to get them out. And the government, our government, President Biden, Secretary Clinton, Blinken, excuse me, Secretary Clinton was my former boss, have said we're going to do that. I think it's very important for us to keep focused on this. So thank you for talking about it right now, Andrea. Those people are still there. I hear from them every day, and they want to get out. Now, with respect to Russia and even China, I would add to your list, in the short term, this is a giant victory for their ideological struggle against us, right? They're saying we have lost, and they're right. Let's be honest. We defeated the Taliban, and now they're back. That is a defeat for the United States and our ideas of democracy and liberty. This is a backlash to that. But in the medium term and the long term, I'm not so sure this is a great victory for Russia or China. Remember, they have large Muslim communities of their own. They have jihadist movements of their own, including in Central Asia, as you just mentioned, right next to Afghanistan, that will create a security challenge for them. And then in the long run, I just keep wanting to remind people, I've heard so many declarations of the end of democracy and Western liberalism this week. And I just want to remind everybody, that's exactly what people said in 1975. Remember 1975, what was going on? It wasn't just one country, Vietnam. It was all of Indochina that had fallen to the communists. They were on the march in Southern Africa and Latin America. We had big problems here at home in terms of human rights and a corrupt president. And 15 years later, we were back. And I don't want to predict the future. I don't know the future. But to say that today is the end of democracy and liberalism in the world, I think that is premature.